r/AskReddit. What's the worst thing you've come home to? My ex-GF is a mean drunk. The closest I've seen to a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type transition. The verbal and physical abuse was the worst I'd ever experienced. One night I can see she's starting to transition. I do my best not to engage her. Doesn't matter at all, and the fact that I'm pretty much ignoring her makes it worse. She starts to hurl insults, then hurl objects. She throws a TV remote at my face and breaks my nose. I go to the washroom, stop the bleeding, then leave our apartment because I just couldn't take any more. I come back around 5:30 am. Our apartment is completely destroyed. She went into a rage because I left. The garbage can and everything inside was smashed against the walls, table and chairs overturned, broken glass and plates everywhere, framed pictures ruined. Basically everything in the living room was fucked. I find her in the bedroom, passed out on the bed, covered in her own piss. I thought to myself, welp, this is the end of this shit right fucking now. I broke up with her, and she was very surprised, because she thought we were doing just fine. Blood everywhere. My 700 SQ/FT apartment looked like a family had been brutally murdered in it. I was working a 12-hour shift at work, and had a friend stop by to check on the dog. She immediately called me to tell me the walls were covered in blood. Carpet was soaked, splatter everywhere. My dog comes running up and he too is covered in blood. He is wagging his tail in pure joy that someone is home, activating the blood sprinkler. He had 2 deep cuts on his tail from a glass bottle he broke. I left work immediately to take care of him. Get home and the sprinkler is going off again and on its highest setting. I call the vet that is across the street from me and let them know the situation and that we are coming over. I try wrapping his wounds in towels and tape them so he isn't splattering everything in a 5-foot radius. Alas, he is such a happy dog and his tail is too strong for my bandage. It slips off in like 2 tail wags. We walk to the vet and I'm trying to sign and simultaneously hold a towel around my dog so he doesn't make a mess. The vets clearly didn't believe the severity when I told them the situation, because when they saw the amount of blood going all over their pristine lobby they started panicking and trying to get her mop to clean it up. We waited in the lobby for maybe 15 minutes. There was a lot to clean. Cleaning the apartment took me about 8 bottles of peroxide and about 4 hours of cleaning with the help of a few other people. I've never seen that much blood before. Over a course of a couple months we tried staples, stitches, glue, and a combination of all of them at once. His happy tail was too happy for any of them to work, and his wounds wouldn't shut and heal. We ended up having to amputate his tail. Now he is a proud member of the Wiggle Bud Nub Club. My family was in the kitchen, where there was a completely somber tone. They were quiet for quite some time and I broke the silence with, "Who died?" They then all told me that they had found a noose in my brother's closet and were trying to figure out what to do about the situation. At that point my brother had basically barricaded himself in his own room. His therapist was called and told the family that if my brother didn't want to be admitted into the hospital, then he would have to be checked on every hour during the night. My brother said it had to be my dad, who had a shift at 5 in the morning and couldn't be waking up every hour in the night. My dad wanted to take the hinges of the door, but my brother said it would be a huge invasion of privacy. I don't know if he ended up cracking the door, but I'm fairly certain no one checked on him. In high school I was always the first person home in the afternoon, so it was my job to take care of our family's miniature dachshund. She was crated during the day, which was normally fine. But one day she had horrible explosive diarrhea. By the looks of it, not more than an hour or so before I got home. Plenty of time for her to panic and thrash around in it, but not nearly enough time for it to dry up. The tray of her crate was covered in it. She was covered in it. The floor and walls surrounding her crate had littered pock marks of poo juice. I felt so bad for her. I brought her and the crate outside and lightly hosed her off. By the time my mom got home I was giving the dog a bath, for which she seemed very grateful, and the crap covered crate was still baking in the front yard sun. This is a challenge to answer because there have been many. The worst, however, may have been this one. Pittsburgh received an ungodly amount of rain this spring/summer. Neighborhoods flooded, houses slid down hills, and the point went underwater. Needless to say, it was a good year for a new homeowner like myself to discover how water affects a home. 2 months after purchase, I come home from night class, was at work since 4:45 am. At 9:45 and the house smells and feels damp. I knew something was wrong and my gut was sinking. Let me preface that my basement hates me. So much has happened in that basement over the past 2 months that opening the door to the basement is enough to trigger a day's worth of anxiety, let alone having this sinking feeling there may be water down there. I make it 1/4 down the stairs and immediately I know there's water down there somewhere. I can smell it. I peer over to the other side, and there's water pouring in from the exterior basement door and the back half of the basement carpet is soaked. Like, it's black, it's so soaked. Fortunately, the unfinished side has a drain and vinyl flooring, so there was no issue over there, but between the humid, damp, and musty smell of the finished side and all of the house centipedes strewn about the room enjoying the crappy environment, I was feeling downright defeated. Before I started cleaning, I discovered a large maple leaf clogged the surface of the drain in the exterior walkway to my basement and caused the entire walkway to pool up with rainwater. I was up until 1:30 am that night shop vasing the water out of the carpet. I'm very fortunate the carpet is all weather, so I could allow it to dry over the next few days. I promptly purchased a dehumidifier and atrium drain the next morning. To this day, I'm still paranoid every time I come home. Side note, I guess I should be happy I had a house to come home to, considering a few slid down the hills. My family was babysitting my aunt's dogs, and we left them in the house to run an errand. So after a while, it's done, and we go home. Mom puts the key in the lock, turns the knob, and before the door comes unlatched she whispers, "Someone shit on the carpet." The smell wafted through the tiny crack in the door, and as we pushed it open, it hit us full force. The puddle was only like 5 feet from the door. It was the size of a microwave. We didn't really know if it was shit or vomit, just that it was a gigantic puddle of brown sludge that looked as though it had been slung from the top of a skyscraper and came to rest on our carpet. It took hours to fully clean up. Our house smelled for days, and somehow it was our fault that my aunt's dog threw up/shat in our house, even though we didn't do anything that she wouldn't have done with them, so she never let us babysit again. The screams of 5 mice stuck in glue traps. I was in college and coming home for the winter one year and my mom had a minor mouse infestation. She decided to buy these glue traps to catch them, and they were effective. However, unlike regular mouse traps that kill them instantly, these just trap them and let them die of exhaustion and/or hunger. When I got home that day, 5 of them had gotten caught in the traps and were screaming their lungs out in desperation. It was such a terrifying symphony of screams, and I had absolutely no idea what was going on when I walked through the door and worried that something had happened to my dog Snoopy. He was fine, and after I called my mom she explained what was going on and asked me if I could take care of them, which was also a shitty thing to come home to. I came home from working at a call center. I started at 5 am. So I could be home for lunch and still have some day left to do things and spend time with my kids. I walk in the door and my husband, who was stay-at-home dad for our 2 and 3Y/0 children, was fast asleep and snoring on the couch. In the kitchen the freezer door was wide open and most likely had been for hours. This was a drawer style one on the bottom of the fridge, so golden lining was that neither kid had fallen and had it closed on them. Those tubes of yogurt we kept in the freezer were all over the house, partially eaten having been bitten open with the rest melting into the carpet. Kids were in the youngest's room, the entire toy box empty and them sitting in it still in pajamas and overflowing pus diapers. Oh, and we had one bedroom wall entirely covered in scribbles. 2 screaming, needy toddlers couldn't wake him up all morning, but I yell what the fuck, and he bolts awake. First thing he does, make coffee and go smoke a cigarette while I change the kids and clean up. We had a yelling match outside and I took the kids to my parents. There had been a lot of bad shit before and came after until we divorced, but I still look back at that as one of the real straw breaking the camel's back moments. I quit my job shortly after making him be the breadwinner because obviously he couldn't be trusted to care for them. April of this year, I met my dad for dinner at my favorite restaurant. I'd been slammed at work and it was really nice to see him. I came home to my wife sleeping on the couch in the TV room. I went into my soap lab, I have a small side business making soap products, and cut some bars from a batch of soap I'd made the night before. I then went back to the TV room and sat next to her on the couch and played some Boom Beach on my iPad. Mega Crab event was going on. It was getting sort of late, so I poked her and suggested we go to bed. She wouldn't wake up. I gently and jokingly licked her ear. I started getting worried when she wouldn't respond. I found myself shaking her trying to wake her. I then looked closer and realized she had taken an overdose of medication. Things haze out in my memory here, but I ended up sobbing and begging her to wake up. My great Friday evening had turned into the worst night of my life. My wife has been diagnosed with depression since she was in high school. She had been having an awful time at work and wasn't in a good place. I called 911 and they were at my house within 2 minutes. We live right by Tar Fire Station. They had 3 cops come with them. 2 young cops and a veteran. The 2 younger ones started grilling me before the vet pulled them away. I was dazed, scared, and approaching the mindset of a wounded and cornered animal. It was good for all of us that the veteran officer was there. My wife ended up hospitalized for 2 weeks. Turns out on top of depression, she also had pneumonia. At the end of all of it, she quit the job with her abusive manager and had a new job within a couple weeks after leaving the hospital. This was only about 5 months ago. My wife is doing a lot better, but depression is lifelong. I came close to losing my best friend that night. It was hands down the scariest place I've ever been. It wasn't just the fear of losing her. It was also the culmination of a year of professional bullying that my wife has been subjected to. I was filled with a blind rage I didn't know I was capable of. I know I came within a hair's breadth of vengeful wrath against the person I hold as partially responsible for pushing my wife to considering ending her life. If you or a loved one seems like they are heading in the direction my wife, please take it seriously. It was an experience that was every bit as awful as you'd imagine multiplied by 1,000,000. To see that everyone was home. My high school was over a mile from home and I had American football practice. The one horrible year I played that horrible game. As was normal for us, someone was supposed to be available to pick me up. So I sat around for a few minutes, the buses left, and eventually I went to a phone and called the home phone. This was before everyone had cell phones, by like a year. After ringing once, my younger brother answers and I start with, "Hey, I need someone to pick me up from school." And he just shouts, "Norbert is home," and hangs up. So I walk over a mile, carrying my backpack, my gym bag, my pads, my helmet, through the fucking rain. And what do I see when I get to the street? Every fucking car my family owned was there. Mom, dad, older brother. I asked them when they got home, and they were like, "We've been here for hours. Did you walk?" I walked over and found out that the reason my brother had said that nobody was home was he was playing Two Town, was annoyed by the sound of the phone going off, and didn't want people talking on it, so he just told me nobody was home, so I wouldn't spend 30 fucking seconds asking to be picked up. So I walked over and turned off the computer in the middle of his game. Now, I'm also a gamer and I know how much of a dick move that is. It was deserved. I used to live with my grandmother and parents. Grandmother previously had a stroke and was way less mobile, and communicating wasn't extremely productive. She could still speak, but it was slow and drawn out. One day I was coming home from school. I was 10 to 12. I hear this low raspy sound when I walk in. Nothing else. You-ha-ha. Immediately, I know it's her, so I go looking. Bedroom? Nope. Bathroom? Nope. Kitchen? Nope. My bedroom and then parents' bedroom? Nope. Where the fuck is she? I go room to room now looking in every possible location. When I got back to the kitchen, that's when I noticed it. On the floor, in front of the open fridge, was my grandmother. Bathrobe splayed open. She was completely nude. Covered in milk. I'd been trained to call for an ambulance or hit her life alert, which she was wearing but couldn't reach. So I hit the button. They called and sent an ambulance over. They'd also called my parents who rushed home. While waiting, I did get her standing, then seated, as I took a class on how to do that. So it wasn't too traumatizing. A+ service by Life Alert 5/7 for seeing grandma nude covered in milk. Got home after work, sat down on my couch, caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, turned towards the love seat and see a squirrel sitting on top of it. Then look behind the love seat and see that my air conditioner side paneling was torn to shreds and all over the floor. Chased the squirrel out and made better side paneling, but the squirrels never stopped trying to get in. It was horrible hearing them scratching and gnawing. My landlord tried putting up some wire fencing around the window hoping to prevent them from getting in. Instead, they would manage to get in and then forget how to get out. So they would be trapped between the wiring and my account, panicking and gnawing, and the windowsill land, and I'd feel bad for them and despise them at the same time. This went on for a long time and I now fucking hate squirrels and window account units. My friends printed and framed a particularly good photo of one of those squirrels attempting to get in, and bought me a squirrel throw pillow. Meth lab bust. I was raised by my grandparents. They were wonderful people who adopted a bunch of shitty kids, and they'd let my aunt and her boyfriend move their RV onto the property because they got kicked out of wherever they were staying. The worthless assholes were trying to cook meth in it, and it caught on fire, so they ran off and left it there burning. The neighbors called 911 and the fire department got the fire out before it got to the house. It was nice coming home from school to that. It was a huge shitstorm. My grandparents were almost arrested, and they almost lost their house and land. Pretty much the only thing that saved them was that the meth lab was in a vehicle registered to the boyfriend. Even though we didn't get into any legal trouble, it was still a pain in the ass because the whole house had to be tested and they had to hire someone to clean up the mess and have the property test clean before we could move back in. And my childhood home is listed as a former meth lab on the National Clandestine Laboratory Register. My grandparents never recovered financially. My dad came home to find a wasp in the house. And then another. And then another. He investigated. Heard a buzzing coming from the dining room. An entire nest of wasps had been living in the walls and chewed through the sheetrock or whatever it is they did and were now pouring into the house through the hole. Edit to answer a few questions. The dining room was a formal room only used for holidays and dinner parties, and since it was summer most entertaining they did was done outside. So no buzzing heard. Also my dad was older and hearing does get less sharp. Exterminator cleared it out. My dad removed the sheetrock and replaced it and replaced all the vent covers. They typically had wasp nests hanging from the eaves all the time, so seeing wasps outside wouldn't have been noticed. They even had them in the mailbox. When I was around 7, I came home from a family weekend away. I walked into my room towards my cove. I had this hanging chain that you put your beanie babies on. As I passed it, it seemed like there was a bunch of dust particles in the air around me. I started moving my hands in front of my face, as if to push the dust particles from blocking my view. That was when I realized these were not dust particles, but rather hundreds upon hundreds of tiny baby spiders. While we were gone, tons of eggs hatched, and I was walking in all of them hanging from the ceiling on web strings. I immediately ran screaming into the shower and refused to go back in for days after my dad killed them all. That was the end of me having beanie babies. Time to grow up. TL/DR. Hundreds of spiders hatched from eggs. I walked into them all over me. Edit. For those who asked, this was in Connecticut. Feel free to cross that off your travel destinations. Whether or not the spider laid the eggs on the beanie babies, or they came from within, I was taking no chances. My dad said that was the epicenter and he could see tons crawling on them, as if their fur was blowing in the wind. Not necessarily something I came home to, but happened right as I came home. I had a really long day at work, and when I got home, the parking spot I usually used was taken, so I had to park across the street. I walked inside and crashed down on the couch, exhausted, ready to relax, when I heard a smash outside. I had a sinking feeling and just thought to myself, damn it, someone just hit my parked car. I looked out the window and sure enough someone had slammed into the back of my car, causing thousands of dollars of damage, and then drove off. I had just gotten my car back from the shop after being hit 2 weeks before. When I was in about 6th grade or so, my family and I adopted a dog, Sally, we had found abandoned with her pups. We found the pups a home and decided to keep Sally. Little did we know the mom had separation anxiety. Before I left for the school bus one morning after my parents had gone to work, I was to put Sally in her kennel, but she absolutely refused to get in. Knowing I was already running late, I just gave up and left. When I came home that afternoon, it was pure destruction. The blinds had been destroyed. She had scattered all my things on my desk on the floor, including a small fish tank, and the house had a myriad of broken objects throughout. Let's just say my parents weren't too thrilled, but I managed to persuade them to keep her. To this day she was one of my absolute favorite dogs. Who older thought? My brothers, 20 and 22, and I, 20 meters, came home from college for winter break. The next day my mom wakes me up asking if I planned on going with the rest of the family to put my childhood dog, 13F, down. She had told everyone weeks before that this was going to happen when we got home for break, but forgot to tell me. Similar thing happened to me. I came home for a week around Christmas, and my family had decided to put the dog I grew up with down, and nobody had told me about it. I thought I should go, so my dad, my uncle, my wife and I all went to the shelter. Dad and uncle left when it was time to do the deed, but my wife and I stayed with him. Mickey was a good boy. On the flip side, my wife and I were going on a trip out of state in January of this year, so we left our dog with my parents. My wife and kid left before I did. The trip was to Hawaii at the Aulani/Disney resort, and on the day before I was to join them, I got a text from my mom asking if my normally high energy dog was ever sluggish, and she sent me a video where he wouldn't even lift his head when she called him. We had my parents rush him to the vet, and the final conclusion was that he had a variety of things wrong with him, including a mass in his stomach, but they couldn't operate because a blood test had shown that the count of blood cells that would clot was effectively zero in his system, so he had some other terrible thing wrong with him also. We didn't have a good choice but to put him down, and boy oh boy was that tough not being there to say goodbye to our companion of 8 years. My mom and dad stayed with him, and he really liked my mom, so that's something. Anyhow, I don't mean to upstage you. Dogs are too good for us, and it's really shitty when they have to leave. A screaming argument between my folks. I was hungover. I had just found my good group of buddies and we were going out on the weekends getting drunk and being young and dumb. I came home and went to bed. As I lay there drifting in and out of sleep, I could hear a lot of ruckus. It wasn't unusual for them to argue or scream, but I do remember thinking my mom's voice had rarely sounded so raw, so full of pain. I thought, I'm 17, I'm hungover, I'm not going to deal with this, and went back to sleep. A few hours later I woke up. It was quiet. My dad was gone. I went into her bedroom. It was dark. The air stank of alcohol blended with vomit. That raw, ugly acidic odor. I went up to the bed. There was a splash of vomit on the floor and a thicky chalky pile of regurgitated pills. She tried to kill herself. Kid decided to remove diaper after pooping, then smear the poop everywhere. Wife was covered in it and everyone was screaming. When I walked in, I assumed someone was severely injured. Edit, this isn't even the most memorable poop story, just the most recent. This one was also one that fell to my lovely wife to deal with. Let me tell you about the death of Potsy. Back when my kids were maybe 2 and 4, they had this cooking pot toy. It would chatter away as you played with it, singing about food and colors. They also had this pop-up tent in their play area. Well, somehow, the 2-yo pooped in Potsy. It starts singing, "Every food has a special color." Well, the 4-yo takes Potsy directly to the play kitchen and starts pretending to cook with it. At this point, they're playing quietly, so no alarms have been raised. Of course the 4-yo then takes the Potsy pot of poop porridge and starts trying to feed it to the 2-yo. This is when the drama started, as well as the smearing. Potsy died that day, well loved and full of stew. The tent was also a victim, as were some of the pretend veggies and utensils that came with Potsy. I came home, and half of the playroom was gone, and my wife had a 1,000-yard stare. We've since bought another Potsy, but the legend lives on. I came out from work on a heavy rain day in late autumn to find my new used car flooded. The sunroof didn't seal properly and leaked a lot. At first I didn't notice, because I had parked facing downward on a hill. I started up the car, pulled out, and, upon hitting level ground, a 4-inch wave of icy cold water sloshed over my feet from under the dash. I couldn't get my head around it, just couldn't grasp what was happening. Stopping in the middle of traffic, I just sat there staring down at the wading pool on the floor of my new used car. After a few moments someone honked, so I drove home. Yes, I knew I should go directly to the dealership, or a repair shop, or somewhere other than my own garage. But I didn't. I drove across town with water sloshing back and forth around my feet, like in a sinking ship. I remember laughing out loud at one point, thinking, maybe I can dry it out with the leaf blower. In the end, I sucked it out with a shop vac and manhandled a full-sized dehumidifier into the backseat, rigged up to extension cords to run all night. I went out every couple of hours to empty it, and the next day I parked it in the sun and left all the windows down. After a few days it was dry, so I took it in to have the sunroof repaired. To this day I have no idea why I didn't want anyone to know what happened. It's not as if it were my fault or anything. Maybe just that the experience was so weirdly surreal that I couldn't break the spell. Came home and found my front door wide open, my parents missing, my neighbors on my front lawn, we don't talk to my neighbors, and blood all over our grass and the nearby wall. Turned out my father, who knows how to do professional landscaping / tree trimming / gardening etc., was trimming the tree in our front yard when a branch broke, and he lost his balance. He fell backwards and ended up landing on our neighbor's fence, which is topped by steel spikes. One of the spikes went into his leg, though he apparently didn't even notice or feel it, so he pulled himself off the fence without a problem, but when he tried to stand he collapsed onto the lawn. He lost a lot of blood and had to have emergency surgery, but survived. His wound was so bad that when he made it to the hospital, a police officer and doctor confronted him because they figured he had to have been shot and tried to get him to admit it so that they could find the culprit. It was an incredibly scary moment, but that was 17 years ago, and he is fine today, though he did end up eventually getting his revenge by chopping that tree down. My wife and I left our 2 cats home over the weekend. Something spooked them or something, so they thought that each other were foreign intruders. Apparently this included a fight inside the litter box, which had a couple days worth in it. Long story short, both cats were totally covered in shit. Neither had used the litter box since, so there were presents everywhere. They had been sprinting all over the apartment, so everything else was covered in shit, and they would completely freak out and hiss the second they saw one another. All we had to do was get them close enough to recognize each other through their now brown coats of fur, and they were totally chill best friends again. The humans on the other hand has days of cleaning to do after that. PS, these cats are literally best friends that sleep together, clean each other, etc. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.